In this video, I will show you how airplanes are weighed. I will show you two small aircraft, a 1948 Beechcraft Bonanza, shown here, and a 1978 Gulfstream Tiger. The actual weighing of the two airplanes are the same, so I will only show one. But there are slight differences between the two aircraft in the reference documents used, the method of leveling the planes to calculate the center of gravity position, and the method of draining the fuel tanks to the unusable fuel level. So I will show those differences on both aircraft. The first question to answer about weighing aircraft is, when should an aircraft be weighed? To answer that question, I need to talk a little about federal aviation regulations. In aviation, we use abbreviations for almost everything, so we call the federal aviation regulations the FARs. All aircraft except drones used for recreation and under 55 pounds must follow FAR Part 91 General Operating and Flight Rules. The two aircraft I described here are privately owned and used for private use, so we call that Part 91 operations. Aircraft that are extended to the general public have additional regulations. Aircraft used for charter operations have additional regulations under FAR Part 135, and scheduled airlines have additional regulations under FAR Part 121. Aircraft operating in Part 135 or Part 121 are required to be weighed at least every 3 years. Part 91 does not require aircraft to be weighed, so the owner of the aircraft or the mechanic inspecting the aircraft that is required every year decides when the aircraft needs to be weighed. So when should the decision be made to weigh an aircraft? Let's look at these two aircraft. At the time of this video, the 1948 Bonanza is 77 years old, 1 year younger than me. Aircraft are like people. They gain weight as they age. The owner, a very experienced airline captain, asked me to weigh the aircraft because when he did weight and balance calculations with the previous aircraft information, the calculations did not work out. The previous aircraft empty weight and center of gravity, abbreviated as CG, were incorrect. I have not done the annual inspection on the Bonanza, so I don't know its history. I don't know how many times the paint was stripped and the aircraft was repainted. I don't know how many times the equipment on the aircraft was updated. Whenever equipment on an aircraft is updated, it is required to calculate the new empty weight and CG, but any errors in those calculations compound over the years. For the 1978 Tiger, the owner asked me to remove the old vacuum-driven attitude and heading indicators and replace them with new state-of-the-art electronic indicators. I did that and also removed the vacuum pump and vacuum plumbing, which was no longer needed. Calculating a new empty weight and CG by subtracting the old equipment and adding the new equipment will be difficult since the vacuum plumbing was in different locations in the engine compartment and behind the instrument panel, so I decided to weigh the airplane instead. In summary, an aircraft should be weighed whenever the weight and balance calculation results in an unexpected outcome, when an aircraft has undergone extensive repair or major alteration, or when it is repainted. An excellent reference for weight and balance is the FAA Weight and Balance Handbook. The section on how to weigh an aircraft in the Weight and Balance Handbook is Chapter 3. Another excellent reference is the Mechanic's Bible, FAA Advisory Circular AC 43.13, Acceptable Methods, Techniques, and Practices. It is a large 2-volume set. Volume 1B covers inspection and repair, and Volume 2B covers aircraft alterations. The section on aircraft weighing is in Volume 1B, Section 2, Weighing Procedures. Both documents are available on the FAA Dynamic Regulatory System at drs.faa.gov. I have a link to drs.faa.gov in the comments below. Also, links to download free copies of both documents are available in my website, littleairplanedriver.com, on the documents page. That website also has links to the tools used to weigh aircraft on the affiliate store page. I have a link to littleairplanedriver.com in the comments below. Next is a short discussion of the terminology about aircraft weight and balance. If you're a pilot or an A&P, you probably know this stuff already, although there's one part you probably don't know, and you may want to skip ahead, but it's just a short and good review. Weight is pretty obvious. It is the weight of the airplane. Empty weight is the weight of the airplane with nothing in it. No people, no baggage, no fuel except for the unusable fuel, which is the fuel the engine cannot draw out. The weight of the engine oil is a little more complicated. If the aircraft was certified, that's certified, not built, before the FAA was created in August 1958, it was certified under the Civil Aeronautics Regulation, CAR-3, and then engine oil is not included in the aircraft empty weight. If the aircraft was certified after August 1958, it was certified under FAR Part 23, and then the weight of the oil is included in the empty weight. By the way, if you're weighing an aircraft that was built before the Civil Aeronautics Authority, the CAA, was created in 1938, it was probably not certified, and you will probably have a difficult time to find guidance on how to weigh the aircraft. How should you determine if the engine oil should be included in the aircraft empty weight? Best way is to look at the weight and balance section of the Airplane Flight Manual, abbreviated AFM, that's CAA terminology, or the Pilot's Operating Handbook, abbreviated POH, FAA terminology. If that reference indicates unusable oil weight in the aircraft empty weight, and shows adding engine oil weight on the calculation sheet, then the empty weight does not include oil. Otherwise, engine oil is included in the aircraft empty weight. In either case, add the statement empty weight does not include engine oil, or empty weight does include engine oil in all caps next to the empty weight entry on the weighing form. Center of gravity, abbreviated CG, is a term rarely used by non-pilots. It is a confusing term for some small airplane pilots also. Center of gravity is not as important for cars that are driven normally as it is important for aircraft. That is because cars are on the ground on 4 tires, and the center of gravity is between the tires. Center of gravity is important for race cars because the drivers are operating on the edge of controllability. Center of gravity is important for aircraft because the aircraft is not on the ground, so its stability is very dynamic. When an aircraft rotates, it rotates around the center of gravity. The center of gravity, the CG, is also called the axis of rotation. If the aircraft is loaded outside the CG range, it can become unstable and difficult to control. The combination of aircraft loaded weight and CG is called the weight and balance envelope. Under Charter FAR Part 135 and Airline Part 121 regulations, weight and balance must be calculated for every flight. You may ask, when I fly the airlines, they don't weigh me. How do they compute weight and balance? Large turbine aircraft have so much power and have such a wide envelope that the FAA allows them to estimate the weight of passengers and carry-on luggage. Checked luggage is all weight. Airlines are required to occasionally weigh passengers and carry-on to make sure their estimates are reasonably accurate. Private aircraft operating under FAR Part 91 are not required to compute weight and balance, but with the advent of inexpensive aviation navigation software, it is so quick and easy to compute weight and balance, it should be done for every flight. I use the software AVAIR on my Android phone and tablet, which is free. It's available on the site littleairplanedriver.com. There are links to other aviation navigation software on my website. The next term is datum. Datum is the singular form of the word data. So datum is a singular piece of information. In Star Trek Next Generation, Data was a very unique individual, so his name should have been Datum. In aviation, the datum plane is the location we measure from to a movable weight in the aircraft. The datum location is chosen by the engineers who design the aircraft. It is frequently at a part of the aircraft that is easily recognizable, such as the firewall or wing leading edge, but it can be an abstract location. The Bonanza and Tiger both place the datum in front of the aircraft. The next term is arm. Arm is the distance from the datum to the object being weighed. The further the object is from the datum, the more the object affects the CG. Objects behind the datum have a positive arm. Objects in front of the datum have a negative arm. With the datum in front of the Bonanza and Tiger, the pilot only needs to deal with positive arms. Single-engine Cessnas have the datum at the firewall, so the only negative arm the pilot would deal with is the engine oil. Aircraft certified under FAA Part 43 include oil in the aircraft empty weight, so the pilot rarely needs to compute the oil in the weight and balance. The last term is moment. Moment is arm times weight. With most U.S. manufactured aircraft, we measure moment in inch-pounds. In this example, there is a 10-pound weight 70 inches behind the datum. Multiplying 10 times 70, we get a moment of 700 inch-pounds. Now we are ready to start the aircraft weighing procedure. We start the aircraft weighing procedure with how we start almost everything in aviation, reviewing the reference documentation. What we need to look up is the datum location, whether engine oil is included in the empty weight, what the arms are to the wheels, and the leveling means. I need to briefly discuss aircraft level. When small aircraft are sitting on its wheels, the aircraft is tilting back. Tricycle gear aircraft with a nose wheel sits more level than what we call conventional gear aircraft with a tail wheel. We call tailwheel aircraft a conventional gear because that was what was conventional before World War II when the terminology was created. When the aircraft is tilted back, this throws more weight back on the main gear. If we weigh the aircraft in this position, the CG will measure too far back, so we need to weigh the aircraft in flight level position. After 1958, when the FAA was created, the datum location and leveling means is found in the Type Certificate Data Sheet, abbreviated TCDS. Both of these are a mouthful, so usually just call it a type certificate. Here is the type certificate for the Tiger. The Bonanza was certified before 1958, so we have to hunt for the information. Here is the leveling means and datum location found in the service manual and airplane flight manual, respectively. The Tiger was certified after 1958, so engine oil is included in empty weight. The Bonanza certified before 1958 does not include engine oil in its empty weight. To confirm that, we look in the POH, the Pilot Operating Handbook, for each aircraft. Some aircraft manuals provide the arms to the main and nose gears. This is useful information when weighing the aircraft. If the arms in the manuals do not match the values you measured, first recheck the values you measured. If after rechecking the measurement several times, the numbers still do not match, a thorough inspection for gear damage is indicated. Both the Bonanza and Tiger manuals do not list main and nose gear arms. Next, the information needs to be entered into the aircraft weight and balance report form. Now we are ready to actually work on a plane, but we're not ready to weigh the plane yet. First, we need to drain the usable fuel. The usable fuel is the fuel the engine can use while flying. Some mechanics prefer to fill the plane and then subtract the weight of the fuel from the calculations. In fact, FAA's AC 43131B and Aircraft Weight and Balance Handbook both say this is an acceptable way to calculate weight and balance. I prefer not to do this. There are problems with weighing with full tanks and subtracting the weight. Many aircraft use fuel bladders, which are held in place with snaps or clips. If one or more snaps or clips come undone, the bladder could hold less fuel than what the plane should hold. Also, a crease can form at the bottom of the bladder, trapping fuel, thereby increasing the amount of unusable fuel. Further, many pilot operating handbooks do not explain what level to fill the tanks for full fuel, so in that case it would be unclear what level results in a full tank. And there is an additional big advantage to draining the tanks. I drain the tanks into 5-gallon containers. As I refill the tanks, I check the fuel gauges at each 5-gallon interval to make sure they are accurate. Having accurate fuel gauges is important and required by the FARs. Before draining the tanks, I ask the pilot if he is comfortable with the accuracy of his or her fuel gauges. Sometimes the pilot answers with, "I have a fuel totalizer," or "I stick the tanks before every flight," or "I go by time," which are all excellent procedures. I will answer with, "Isn't it a good idea to have as much information as possible for something as important as fuel quantity?" And I would recommend upgrading the fuel quantity system while the tanks are empty. CIES makes excellent fuel senders that, when coupled to a good panel fuel display, will be accurate to 1/10 of a gallon. It is very comforting when your time computation, fuel totalizer, and fuel gauges all agree that you have plenty of fuel to reach your destination. So I want to weigh the airplane in its empty weight without fuel. So before I weigh the airplane, I need to pull the fuel out of the airplane down to unusable fuel. Unusable fuel is part of the empty weight. To pull the fuel out, I've got a 12-volt electric pump that is good for gasoline or jet fuel. And I got a 10-micron filter for filtering the fuel, which also filters out water. And there's a hose down in the tank going to swivel fittings on both the intake and the outlet to make it easier to get the tubing where it needs to go. And I just simply turn on the pump. And there you see it's pulling the fuel out. And I'm pumping it into 5-gallon containers and I have several containers, enough to pull out all the fuel in the airplane. Before draining the tanks down to unusable fuel, I need to first level the aircraft both longitudinally and laterally. The Tiger is leveled longitudinally on the canopy rail and laterally across the 2 canopy rails. The Bonanza is leveled longitudinally with a straight edge across the 2 rectangular cutouts in the baggage door frame, and laterally, like most aircraft, with a bubble level across the cockpit floor, preferably across the seat tracks. In both cases, I jack up the tail of the aircraft until the bubble level is centered. I measure from the bottom of the wing right next to the main gear to the ground before and after bringing the aircraft level, subtracting the smaller measurement from the larger measurement to compute the height of the spacers to place under the scales to level the aircraft. So after we drain the tanks with a hose and a pump, then disconnect the fuel pump on this particular airplane and connect a hose onto it and run it down into a tank, and we pump that until it runs dry, which will then leave in the tanks the unusable fuel. Now, while I'm running the fuel pump, to not run down the battery, I've got it hooked up to a battery charger, and that keeps the battery charged up using the Norco Genius. You don't want to use standard automotive battery chargers on aircraft batteries. The plates are closer together than they are on automotive batteries. The acid is a higher concentration. So if you use a standard automotive battery charger on an aircraft battery, you can warp the plates and destroy the battery. Before I bought the Norco Genius, in this case, this is the 2600. The 1300 would work fine too. I spent about an hour and a half with the head engineer at Norco, who told me more about batteries than I would possibly know in the future, and explained to me why the Norco battery chargers would not harm aircraft batteries. And of course, the Norco battery chargers, like this Norco 2600, is around $150 as opposed to a battery charger from Gill or Concord, which is gonna, for aircraft batteries, is gonna run around $1,500 to $2,000. As you can see, there's no longer fuel running through the hose, and air bubbles are coming out of the tank, so that tank is empty. I had already drained the left tank, and this was the right tank, so now both of the tanks are down to unusable fuel only. The Bonanza has a fuel percolator, so we drained fuel from there with the aircraft level to get to the unusable fuel level. The fuel was just dripping out slowly, so we decided to go have lunch while the tank drained. When we came back from lunch, the left tank had stopped flowing, so the tank was empty except for unusable fuel. We drained the right tank from the percolator with the auxiliary electric fuel pump on, and the mixture set to idle cutoff, so it went a lot faster. After draining the Tiger's tanks, I filled 7 5-gallon containers. The tanks were originally filled to 1 inch below the 19-gallon tabs, so that was pretty accurate. The fuel gauges both show empty, with both tanks having only unusable fuel, so that is also accurate. When I got done weighing the aircraft, I refilled the tanks 1 5-gallon container at a time and checked that the fuel gauges were accurate throughout the entire range. I forgot to video record the refueling of the tanks. Now, finally, it is time to weigh the aircraft. A set of aircraft scales start at about $2,000. I bought racing car scales. At the time, they cost me $600. Now they are between $860 and $1,060. My website, littleairplanedriver.com, has links to the racing car scales. Okay, I've got the scales on 3 inches of 2x, and the scales automatically zero when you turn on the receiver, the display unit, and so I don't have any weight on the scales. As you can see, I will be placing the nose wheel on top of that scale after I lower the jacks. So now I'll go ahead and turn on the display unit, and there you can see that all the scales have zeroed out. One of the scales is turned off because I am not using it, because aircraft only have 3 wheels. Now I'll go ahead and lower the aircraft down. Have wheel chocks on the scales so that the aircraft will not roll off of the scales. Okay, now I need to get the scale under the nose wheel, but I don't. So I'm jacking the nose up using the nose strut attach point. lower the jack down to make sure that it's not touching. Next, I need to close the canopy to 6 inches according to the service manual. Now let's check the weights. The nose wheel is 386 pounds. The left main is 530 pounds. The right main is 529 pounds. And the total weight is 1,446 pounds. And let's enter those into the aircraft weight and balance report. The scales were zeroed with the wheel chocks on them. Nothing was placed on the scales after they were zeroed, so the tare weights are 0. Now I will calculate the center of gravity, the CG, by measuring the arms to the landing gear axles. Some service manuals list the arms to the landing gears, but it is standard practice to measure them. I'd like to compare my measurements to the arms listed in the service manual when provided as a double check to my measurements and as an indication of possible gear damage. The measurements must be made while the aircraft weight is fully on the gear with the aircraft level, as the geometry of some gears change with weight. In the future, I plan to take these measurements when I have leveled the aircraft for draining the tanks before placing the aircraft on the scales, because that would be easier with the scales not in the way. First, I will measure the arm to the nose wheel. The type certificate for the Tiger lists the datum 50.0 inches forward of the front face of the firewall. So I drop a plumb bob from the firewall to the floor and mark it with a chalk line. Then I place a square on the chalk line and measure from there to the nose wheel axle, checking several times. I get 12.25 inches. The nose wheel is in front of the firewall, so I subtract the 12.25 inches from the 50.0 to get 37.75 inches. The nose wheel is behind the datum, so it is positive and is entered into the weight and balance report. Now I will measure the arm to the main gears. I am using a laser level. First I place it next to the right gear and point the beam across to the center of the left gear axle. Then I rotate the level up and move it fore and aft to line the beam with the center of the right gear axle. Then I rotate the level down again and rotate it to point the laser beam at the center of the left axle. I now have a line running between the two axles. I now measure from the beam to the chalk mark directly below the firewall, keeping the tape measure perpendicular to the beam, checking several times very carefully. I get 50 3/8 inches. I add this to the 50.0 inches of the datum to the firewall and get 138 inches from the datum to the main gears. I enter this into the aircraft weighing form. If you don't have a laser level, you can use a chalk line and a square. You attach the end of the chalk line to one main gear axle with a clamp, stretch the chalk line to the other axle and attach with a clamp. If you have another person, you don't need the clamps, as each can hold the line to the axles. Then using the square, drop the line to the floor, making marks with chalk, and mark it with the chalk line. Then you can measure from the firewall or whatever reference the aircraft uses to the chalk line. Next, I need to calculate the empty weight and empty CG. So let's drop down to the weight and balance calculation section on the weight and balance form. The total empty weight is taken from the scale display or added up in the weight column. I multiply the weight at each gear by its arm to get its moment. Then I add the moments together and finally divide the total moment by the total weight to get the empty CG. Then lastly, the data is transferred to the bottom of the form and signed and dated. The weight and balance report is placed in the aircraft records and a logbook entry is created and signed. With this, weighing the aircraft is completed. Thank you for watching. I would appreciate you subscribing and clicking the like button.